Now, what if I told you that the year is actually 1727, right? And everything you think you know about the early Middle Ages is actually just well, a sophisticated lie forged by a pope and an emperor. Think about that for a second. I mean, every history textbook you've ever read, every date you've ever memorized about the years 614 to 911 AD, and every legendary battle from that era might be complete and utter fiction. We're talking about a massive 297-year gap that simply shouldn't exist. This isn't just a glitch in the matrix, or some simple clerical error. This is the phantom time hypothesis, a claim so wild it sounds like the plot of a Hollywood thriller. In this alternate reality, the legendary Emperor Charlemagne never sat on a throne, never united Europe, and, never even breathed. He was a ghost story, a propaganda tool, a myth crafted to give legitimacy to a timeline that was manufactured out of thin air. Now, if German historian Herbert Illig is right, and that's a big if, our entire perception of Western civilization is basically a house of cards. But why? Why would anyone go to such lengths? I mean, why would anyone dare to steal nearly 3 centuries from the human story? The answer takes us back to the turn of the first millennium, into the smoky, candlelit chambers of the Vatican, and the grand, ego-driven ambitions of Holy Roman Emperor Otto III. You see, they didn't just want to rule their world. They wanted to rule the year 1000 AD, a date of immense spiritual and political power. And if the calendar didn't say it was the year 1000, they would simply rewrite the past until it did. Today, we're digging through the ruins of a history that, might not even exist. We're hunting for the fingerprints of the greatest temporal heist ever committed. So pay close attention, because by the time we're done, you might just realize that the calendar on your wall is the greatest work of fiction ever written. Take a look at any history textbook, and you'll see it. The early Middle Ages, a sprawling tapestry of rise and fall, featuring the legendary Merovingian kings and the mighty Carolingian Empire. This is the era of Charlemagne, the father of Europe, who, supposedly forged a new world from the ashes of Rome. It's a period filled with grand battles, complex laws, and, the birth of nations. On paper, it's a bustling, vibrant bridge leading us toward the Crusades. But there's a problem. A massive, silent problem that lives right beneath our feet. When archaeologists dig into the earth, they're looking for layers, right? See, every generation leaves a signature. A discarded coin, a broken ceramic pot, the charcoal of a hearth. In Rome, these layers are thick, rich, and undeniable. But as we move into the years between 614 and 911 AD, the soil of Western Europe suddenly goes quiet. It's as if the world simply stopped producing things. We're talking about a total archaeological blackout. No new pottery styles, no significant evolution in toolmaking, and perhaps most baffling of all, a complete disappearance of newly minted coins. In the world of numismatics, money talks. But for these 3 centuries, the currency of Europe is a ghost.
If Charlemagne was ruling an empire that spanned half a continent, where is his trash? Where are the foundations of his massive administrative centers? We see them in the history books, sure. We see the beautiful illustrations and the detailed maps. But when we put a spade in the ground where these events supposedly happened, we find a gap. A void in the stratigraphy that, it just shouldn't be there. It's a world that looks like a populated landscape in our imagination,
but a literal ghost town in the dirt. We have spent centuries memorizing the names of kings who might have never breathed and studying battles that may have never been fought, right? But if these 3 centuries are just a fabrication, it leads us to a much darker realization. Because if the people didn't exist and the buildings were never built, then we have to ask, who was the architect of this billion-day lie? And more importantly, how did they get away with it for over 1,000 years? So enter the ultimate power couple of the Middle Ages, Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II. To the rest of the world, well, they were the undisputed leaders of Christendom. But to proponents of the phantom time hypothesis, they were actually the most successful identity thieves in human history. Now, just imagine for a second that you're Otto III. You're young. You're absolutely obsessed with the glory of ancient Rome. And you honestly believe you are destined for something far greater than just managing a collection of muddy fiefdoms, right? You want to be the man on the throne when the clock strikes midnight on the first millennium. Why? Because in the medieval mind, you see, the year 1000 AD wasn't just a date. It was the ultimate milestone. It was the day of the Lord, a time of cosmic significance where the veil between heaven and earth was at its thinnest. I mean, if you were reigning in, say, the year 702, you were just another footnote in a dark and dusty era. But if you were the emperor of the year 1000, you were a prophetic figure, a ruler chosen by God to lead humanity into the next age. Shifting tone, serious. This is where the theory takes a dark psychological turn, you know? It suggests that Otto didn't want to wait 3 centuries for his moment of glory. So, with the help of his tutor and closest ally, the brilliant but controversial Pope Sylvester II, he simply decided to, well, skip the line. Now, Sylvester was no ordinary pope, right? He was a mathematician, an astronomer, and a man so advanced in his learning that his rivals whispered that he had sold his soul to a demon for his knowledge. Together, these two had the motive, the intellect, and the absolute authority to pull off the ultimate PR stunt. They didn't just change the date on a few letters. They essentially re-schemed the entire timeline. The mechanism was simple, but very effective. The fabrication of the missing years. According to the theory, they didn't just wake up one day and say, it's now the year 1000, right? Instead, they began a massive campaign of document forgery. They created legends of great kings and epic battles to fill the vacuum of the 297 years they had manufactured.
They needed a bridge from the real past to their fictional present, so they invented or embellished characters like Charlemagne, turning a local Germanic leader into a legendary pan-European titan whose exploits could justify 3 centuries of history. Think of it as a medieval version of photoshopping the records. In an age where only a tiny fraction of the population could read, and where the church held a monopoly on information, who was really going to check their work? If the emperor and the pope told you it was the year 1000, well, then it was the year 1000. By jumping ahead, Otto secured his divine right and placed himself at the very center of the world's most important anniversary. He became the architect of an era that hadn't actually happened yet. But, you see, a lie this big usually leaves footprints. If 3 centuries were truly invented out of thin air, then the physical world, the very stone and mortar of Europe, should reflect that massive gap. And when researchers began to look at the actual buildings left behind from this period, they realized that something about the architecture didn't just seem old, it seemed impossible. To really understand how 3 centuries could simply
vanish? Well, we have to look at the four pillars holding this whole radical theory together. Think of these as the forensic evidence at a crime scene. Except you see, the victim is time itself. First up, we have the archaeological void. See, if you were to dig a trench in any major European city today, you'd find these clear, distinct layers of history, right? You'll find the Roman layer, packed with coins, pottery, and foundations. Then you'll find the high medieval layer. But in between, for the years 614 to 911 AD, the soil goes curiously silent. There are no Byzantine coins, no pottery evolution, and almost no residential structures. I mean, it's as if for 300 years, the entire population of Europe just stopped eating, trading, and building. Historians call this the Dark Ages, claiming society simply regressed. But proponents of phantom time ask a much simpler question. What if the ground is empty because those years never happened? Then there's the math. This is the calendar glitch, and it's honestly the closest thing we have to a smoking gun. Now, back in 45 BC, Julius Caesar introduced the Julian calendar. It wasn't perfect, of course. It miscalculated the length of a year by about 11 minutes. Over centuries, those minutes add up to days. By the time Pope Gregory XIII introduced the Gregorian calendar in 1582 to fix the drift, the calendar should have been off by 13 days. But here's the kicker. The Pope's mathematicians only corrected it by 10 days. If the math of the universe is constant, those missing 3 days represent exactly 300 years of documented history that the calendar simply didn't account for. It's a mathematical discrepancy that suggests the clock was moved forward while the world was sleeping.
The third pillar is what we call the architecture jump. Now, in the history of art and building, things usually move in a logical progression, right? But if you look at the leap from the Roman period to the Romanesque style of the 10th century, the transition is, well, non-existent. It's as if architects fell into a deep slumber in the year 600 and woke up in the year 900 with the exact same tools, the same techniques, and the same aesthetic. There is no middle stage. Massive stone vaults and arches appear out of nowhere, perfectly mimicking Roman styles that should have been forgotten centuries earlier. It's like looking at a technological jump from a horse-drawn carriage straight to a combustion engine, with nothing in between. Finally, we arrive at the forgery factory. During the 10th and 11th centuries, Europe was practically drowning in fake documents. I mean, we're talking about monasteries and royal courts producing thousands of ancient deeds, laws, and letters. Even mainstream historians admit that the vast majority of documents from the early Middle Ages are total forgeries, created long after the events they describe. These weren't just small lies, you see. They were the building blocks of a fabricated past, designed to give kings and popes legal rights to lands and titles that never actually belonged to them. When you pull these four pillars together, a chilling picture begins to emerge. We've been taught that history is a solid wall of facts, but when you lean against it, the whole structure starts to wobble. If the earth is empty, the math is wrong, the buildings are impossible, and the documents are fakes, what are we actually left with? The deeper you go, the more it feels like history might just be a consensus of lies, agreed upon by the people who won. But if this entire era was staged, it leads us to the biggest mystery of all. If Charlemagne wasn't real, then who was the man in the crown? And why was someone so desperate to hide the truth that they rewrote the stars themselves? Because, as it turns out, there was one specific person with the power, the motive, and the absolute goal to delete 300 years of human history. Now, the man in the crown? He was most likely Holy Roman Emperor Otto III. Right alongside him was the brilliant, and let's be honest, perhaps equally devious, Pope Sylvester II. Their motive was as
old as time itself: legacy. You see, they wanted to be the very rulers who ushered in the year 1000, a date of massive prophetic significance. To achieve it, well, they simply fast-forwarded the clock. They filled the gap with legends of a warrior king named Charlemagne, creating a glorious artificial past to legitimize their own divine right to rule. Now, if you ask a mainstream historian about this today, and they'll show you carbon dating, tree rings, and the meticulous records of the Chinese Tang Dynasty or the Islamic Golden Age. These civilizations were wide awake while Europe was supposedly, sleeping through the Dark Ages. To the academic world, the phantom time hypothesis isn't a theory. It's a fantasy.
But that's exactly what makes this conspiracy so seductive, right? It exposes the terrifying fragility of our collective memory. We rely on fragments of parchment, the word of long-dead monks, and the selective bias of those who had the power to burn books or preserve them. It reminds us that history isn't always a mirror reflecting the truth. Sometimes it's a painting, commissioned by a patron with a very specific vision in mind. So, whether we are truly living in the year 2024, or, as Herbert Illig suggests, actually standing in the early 18th century, the lesson remains the same. The past is a battlefield where the weapons are pens and the prize is the truth. We are told who we are and where we came from by people we've never met, based on events no one living today witnessed. So, as you look at the calendar today, I want you to ask yourself, how much of your origin story do you actually own? Is our history a solid foundation of fact, or is it a beautifully curated work of fiction designed to keep the world in order? Go ahead and tell me in the comments, do you think those 300 years are truly missing, or is this just a masterclass in historical paranoia? And if you're ready to question everything you've been taught, hit that subscribe button. Because here, we don't just read history, we interrogate it. Until next time, keep your eyes open. The truth is often hidden in the dates we take for granted.